At that time, we were told that Jacqueline Onassis' cancer wasn't that serious. It was just a routine visit. We were also told that Richard Nixon's condition was not life-threatening. As it turned out, they both died. There are a lot of great medical stories. These two were certainly not one of them.
Gary, as you mentioned that she was a grandmother, Caroline has 3 children, Rose, Tatiana, and John Bouvier Kennedy Schlossberg. We are in the processional hymn. Let's listen in.
CNN's Gary Tuckman is just outside the church, out there in the crowd there that is gathering out there as the family and those who were attending the service are now leaving the church. Gary?
Leon, it was very noteworthy when the casket started coming down the steps of the church. You suddenly heard a round of applause from the thousands of people who are standing out here. Normally, you would equate a round of applause during a funeral with being disrespectful, but it was hardly disrespectful. It was these people's way of paying respect to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, First Lady of the United States from 1961 to 1963. Throughout the entire service, even though people here couldn't hear the service, although some people did have transistor radios, people were very solemn. They stood still. They watched the church. They were very respectful. And that was their way of showing the emotion about this service. It was a very majestic sight here, standing across the street from the church and watching the Kennedy family and the Radziwill family and the Bouviers stand on the steps as Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis' coffin was lowered into the hearse with a floral arrangement in the shape of a cross on top of it.
Gary, you say the crowd appeared to be a rather respectful one. What are some of the comments that you were able to hear while you were standing there?
People have decided to come here today, not just from New York City and not just from the United States, but from all over the world because they felt it was their best way of paying respects to a woman who they really respected. One thing you have to keep in mind, it's impossible not to draw parallels between this day in May of 1994 and another particular day in November of 1963, the day that John F. Kennedy was buried. That day you also had a lot of people who wanted to come out into the streets of Washington and pay their respects. It's the same thing today. The same kind of respect you're seeing from people. And people have decided that on their own they would take off of work and take off of school to come here because they knew this was the only way they could pay their respects to this First Lady whose name transcended politics, unlike people like Richard Nixon, who just passed away, and John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated 21 years ago. They obviously had their enemies, even though there was a lot of mourning and sorrow. This woman was not involved in politics other than in the sense of being married to a politician. So it's not like she has political enemies. She was well loved by a lot of people.
One of the folks who came to pay their respects was a Dr. Sonia Lopez I saw on the Wire report this morning, and I thought her quote was so interesting, Bruce. She said there was something she gave to us that was very magical. I felt I loved her in some way I don't understand. And then she talked about magic of her husband when it was almost a year after the assassination, and she wrote an essay that they published in Look magazine, and she said, now I think that I should have known that he, talking about her husband, was magic all along. I did know it, but I should have guessed it could not last. I should have known that it was asking too much to dream that I might have grown old with him and see our children grow up together. And then the part that Senator Kennedy used for part of the eulogy, so now he is a legend when he would have preferred to be a man. And Senator Kennedy said, and the same for her, right, Bruce, that she was a legend as well.
Well, I think that's right, Donna. I was thinking, too, as Edward Kennedy read that eulogy, you know, there's been so much tragedy in this family, so many church services that if you're my age, you look back on. And I was thinking of the last eulogy he read in New York City, which was at St. Patrick's Cathedral, coming up on 26 years ago for his murdered brother, Robert. Mm-hmm. He broke down during that, as I remember, and you know, really just sobbed through it. This, I suppose, because Mrs. Onassis had been ill, and one could see the end coming, was a little calmer, a little perhaps easier for him. But you know, you just look back and what extraordinary and extraordinarily marred lives all these people have had. You can't think of one family that's been through so much.
And she also said in that same essay that I don't think there is any consolation. What was lost cannot be replaced. And this morning on one of the Wire services, I was noticing that feminist writer Gloria Steinem said that she stands for a time to explain, you know, everybody's been talking about her charm and charisma and the fascination with her, and she said that she is the remaining familiar face from a time of hope in this country.
I think that's right. If there was one thing that you associated with the Kennedy administration, it was this great sense of optimism of America can do it, and here was this bright, shining family. And then, of course, all the killing of the 60s, whether it be the murders of the two Kennedy brothers, whether it be the escalating war in Vietnam, the whole thing turned sour and just left a bad taste in people's minds. Somebody referred to the 1960s as a slum of a decade, and it's easy to know what they meant by that. And I think American optimism, which is normally one of our enduring characteristics, kind of disappeared until the presidency of Ronald Reagan.